So there are several more saints we have this week than we had last week, and there are some very important ones. Especially on the 7th, we celebrate Saints Perpetua and Felicity. I spoke recently about what the real strength of women are in their dignity, and these two are another great example of what I'm talking about. For example, Felicity had just given birth recently, and Perpetua was still with child when they were both arrested. The fact that they were not willing, or that they were willing to leave their children to be raised by someone else, they weren't killing their children, they were letting someone else raise them, due to their martyrdom, and the fact that they don't want to deny Christ is extremely heroic. Perpetua's father did what many parents do when they don't like their children's decisions. He was the only pagan in the family, so he didn't get the idea of giving your life up for Christ. He used all the emotional tactics that parents have at their disposal to try and convince her to deny Christ to save her life, but she would not do that. And of course, this is shocking for those of us who are lukewarm, but this is what being a true follower of Christ means, being willing to sacrifice everything. Everything. When she was in prison, that is Perpetua, she gave birth in prison. One of the guards asked her if she could not bear the throes of childbirth without crying out, how would she face the beasts? And her answer, as Father Butler relates it, is that now these are the things I'm suffering, I'm the one suffering them. But when it comes to my martyrdom, there will be someone else, of course meaning Jesus Christ, who is suffering in me. The traditional feast of St. Thomas Aquinas is also this week, but we celebrated him on the modern calendar in January. And the 8th, we commemorate St. John of God. He's another outstanding model of virtue and dedication to the poor. He was a very pious youth, but fell into bad company when he went and joined the military. But finally, after his conversion, he heard a sermon by Venerable John de Avila, and he lamented his sins in a very public way, and the priest encouraged him to turn his grief to the service of God and his neighbor. And so he spent the rest of his life doing penance and expending himself completely at the service of the poor. Father Butler says, he looked upon it as his own misfortune if the necessities of any distressed person in the whole country had remained unrelieved. He was so ardent in his service that even when the hospital was burning, he carried the sick out on his own back. So just a little motivation there to remember the poor next weekend for the second collection. But what I really want to speak about today is the anniversary that we're celebrating, that of the dedication of the parish church. Now, the reason we're not celebrating that Mass, meaning with the texts and the readings and all that, is because we have a table of feasts, a table of liturgical days, that in the modern calendar tells us what takes precedence. So we don't have, the second Sunday of Lent takes precedence over dedication anniversaries. However, it is an important thing to remember because it's an important feast day for us. And so I wanted to speak about this dedication. And to do that, I'm simply going to use the text of the traditional Mass for the dedication of a church because, as usual, the traditional texts are always richer and more Catholic. The introit of the Mass for the dedication is from the book of Genesis. Jacob has a dream, you should remember this story, where he falls asleep and he dreams of a ladder going from earth to heaven with angels ascending and descending on that ladder. And when he wakes from that dream, he exclaims, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Of course, Jesus himself is going to fulfill this prophecy in the Gospels, that he himself is the ladder. And all of this that Jacob is saying, how awesome is this place, the house of God, it's merely from a dream. We have so much more here, and so we should be much more in awe of what we have here. Why is the church so special? I mean, the building itself even. The gospel of the Mass for the dedication is the story of Zacchaeus. Again, you know the story. Zacchaeus was the short tax collector that wanted to see Jesus passing by, so he climbs the tree. Jesus stops, calls him down, And when he repents of his sin, Jesus says, "This day is salvation come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham." So it's when Jesus comes to dwell with us that we have salvation. And the collect of the Mass brings this out even more clearly. The collect says, "O God, who every year dost renew the day of the consecration of this thy holy temple, and continues to bring us in safety to thy sacred mysteries, graciously hear the prayers of thy people, and grant that all who enter this temple to implore thy blessings may rejoice in obtaining whatever they ask." So note that the principal purpose, the existence of a church, is for the celebration of the sacred mysteries and for prayer. And the sacred mysteries, of course, referring directly to the sacraments, and of course the Eucharist of the most blessed sacrament being the most important. In other words, it's where God saves us. It's where we have intimacy with God. That leads us to the reading from the Mass, which is from the Apocalypse. "And I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." Remember that the relationship in marriage between man and woman is merely a reflection of the relationship between God and us, and has even more intimacy than the intimacy between man and wife. "And I heard a great voice from the throne saying, Behold the tabernacle of God with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself with them shall be their God." So what makes this building different from any other building, including other buildings that call themselves churches, is that we have the real sacramental presence of Jesus Christ here. God is everywhere, but he's not everywhere in his humanity. So that first part is correct, but he is not everywhere in his humanity. It is only where you have the Blessed Sacrament that you have Jesus Christ, body, blood, and soul. He's everywhere in his divinity, but he's only in the Eucharist physically with us. So therefore, we should be grateful and respect this church. The only time that Jesus gets violently angry in the Gospel is regarding how the temple was mistreated. "And he saith to them, It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." He's bringing here together words from found in both the prophet Isaiah and Jeremiah. In Isaiah, God says, "I will bring them into my holy mount," which is why the sanctuary is elevated, especially the altar, "and will make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their holocausts and their victims shall please me upon my altar. For my house shall be called the house of prayer for all nations." And in Jeremiah, God says, "Is this house then in which my name has been called upon in your eyes become a den of robbers? I am he, I have seen it, says the Lord." So it's a good reminder to us that church is not a social hall. It is not a cafeteria. That's why we have a parish hall. It's not a living room, and it's certainly not a business. And here I'm speaking both the church proper and the rest of St. Jude's. The church is the temple of God and the tabernacle of the Most High, and we have to treat it as such. But to conclude, I want to share some words from the psalm text of the introit of that Mass. This is from Psalm 83. This is the most important point of all. "How lovely are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts." By the way, tabernacle, again, to be very clear, we're speaking about the word for tent, and it's referring particularly to the temple, the movable temple that was a tent that was used in the Exodus, but the word applies then throughout salvation history to the temple itself, and we particularly use the phrase specifically for the tabernacle in which our Lord is reserved in the Blessed Sacrament. "How lovely are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts! My soul longs and faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh have rejoiced in the living God." So my question to y'all is, do your souls long and faint for the courts of the Lord? Do you find yourself having to sacrifice time that you would rather spend with the Blessed Sacrament in the church so that you can go fulfill your duties? There are at least a few women that applies to, but only a few. Do you lose track of time when you're here because of how much you love to spend time with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament in his temple? I assume, and I'd love to be wrong, that the answer is probably no, or at least not as much as you'd like. And that's because we don't truly appreciate what we have here in our Catholic churches. The good news is that there is a very easy solution to all of this. Just spend more time with him. It's all you have to do. Come here and beg him to inflame your heart. Beg him for the grace to appreciate his presence here with us. And no matter how long it takes for you to conform to that grace, just be here. Come. It requires nothing more than your loving attention. And if you can't give him your loving attention, then give him your attention. And if you can't give him your attention, then just sit and be.